Welcome to the Stephen McCain Podcast, where every week I bring you people doing world-class things in the field of human optimization and performance. This week's episode is all about optimizing performance with nutrition, and I interview Joel Tortoro, who was the registered dietitian for the New England Patriots for 8 years. He was the first full-time dietitian for a professional sports team, and now they all have one. Now he is the director of sports science for Thorne. And if you know me, you know I'm a huge fan of Thorne. I've been using their supplements for 10 years. And what we discuss is all things related to nutrition for performance. And it's interesting to see how he had to work and address professional athletes to really solve their problems, to be high-level performers on the playing field. And then we go through some of Thorne's best sports supplements, and it's interesting to get his take on a lot of these things, especially when it comes to vetting supplement manufacturers, because let's face it, there's a lot of garbage out there. So if you're interested in optimizing performance and nutrition is a big part of that for you, which honestly it should be, I think you're going to love this episode. Let's do it. Joel, welcome to the Stephen McCain Podcast.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited for this one because you have a stellar resume that includes being a full-time dietitian for the New England Patriots, and you work for one of my favorite companies in the world, Thorne. I'm excited to talk about diet for athletes, non-athletes, supplementation, anything that can help people wrap their head around this topic that always seems to be something that is a bit of a moving target, and maybe offer a little bit of a framework, so to speak, to where people can be like, that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's my full-time job and I've got 20 years doing it, and to keep on top of the ever-changing landscape is hard for me. So yeah, if I can be any kind of guiding light for anyone, I'm happy to do that always.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I've been somebody who's studied nutrition. I have a small little nutrition certification. I love supplements. I've studied them for years and decades now, and so this is going to be enlightening. I'd like to start because I'm sure anyone that is listening is probably pinged by the fact that you worked with the New England Patriots and potentially Tom Brady and this dynasty. Maybe if you could talk about like how you got started working with them, because you were the first, correct me if I'm wrong, you were the first full-time dietitian in a professional sports like that?
I was, yeah. So the whole sports performance kind of environment it's really only 25 years old. And it does kind of speak to Bill's, he has an answer for everything, and realized there was a kind of a competitive advantage to be had if you take care of, nutrition, PTs, ATs had been there forever. Strength and conditioning was, at that point, probably about 15, 20 years old in the NFL at the level it is now. And he's like, all right, well, that's 2 out of 3, and then, kind of shortly after they started building up, we call the high performance model now, including the mental health and kind of that side of the industry. So we kind of did, and kudos to him for being a kind of an innovator and seeing an area where, kind of when I got there, he's like, your job is to make sure I don't have to think about this, right? Because he's got so much other things to do. But so kind of the way I found that, and he found me, was, so I was working clinically in ICU trauma, which I loved. And we can probably dig into it a little bit more, but, kind of a lot of what I learned in the trauma nutrition space has kind of rolled over into the performance space. I like to call athletics intentional trauma. We know we're doing the damage to the body, but the body doesn't care. It still has to have an answer for it. But it really all goes back to, I was super fortunate. I went to University of Connecticut in my senior year. The high performance team, the exercise physiology team, came over from Ball State, and it was Dr. William Kramer, who was kind of an OG legend in the field, and his staff. And one of the professors on staff was Jeff Volek, who really just kind of changed my opinion on, because at the time, like I said, there was a couple in college, a couple in, the Olympic and military, but for the most part, it wasn't a full-time job to be a sports dietitian. So, I always had the dual interest in exercise physiology and nutrition. And it was kind of like, you can do that on the side, or you can have a consulting business, for
Yeah.
marathon runners, whoever was willing to listen. But I met Jeff, and he was a PhD in exercise physiology and also dietitian, which is what my degree is in. So it was the first time I saw like, oh, okay, I'm not wrong in thinking that this is something, right? And meeting someone that was doing it at such a high level, and he's, one of the geniuses in the industry. So he was kind of a known commodity, and kind of the Patriots reached out to him. We're like, do you have anyone ideally locally? And he was like, actually, I'm just the guy for you. So I thought I was interviewing to give like, a talk during training camp. And I think my first week I was supposed to be there 10 hours. And by the end, like by the next Monday, they were like, can you just quit your other job? And I was like, of course. Right.
Yeah,
So
of course.
yeah, yeah. So yeah. And it was, I grew up in New England. So it was the hometown team and a team at the highest level. So yeah, I did enough to not get fired year one, and then we kept building the program and watching, the industry grow. It's a responsive industry. So
Yeah.
and now 20 years later, there's, most professional teams have someone full time, if not a pretty extensive consultant. College, Power Five down to D2 all have at least one dietitian, sports dietitians focused solely on athlete health and wellness. So it's been for me one of like the most motivating things is seeing how fast like this concept that was like obvious to all of us, on the health and wellness side, like how do you not have an answer for this,
Yeah.
right? To it being
Yeah.
like on the flip side, and it's, high school recruits are looking at, what is your sports medicine team? What's your high performance team? So it is a very, kind of just ingrained part of the high performance team now, which is exciting to have seen.
Yeah. It sounds like you were very fortuitous, the right place, the right time, and equipped, right? I mean, you obviously did the work to have that alignment. I always say luck is preparation meets opportunity, and you did the preparation. There's the opportunity. That's luck. What an awesome thing to happen. And it's funny because I was sports my whole life, and once somebody does something and everyone finds out about it, that becomes the new standard that everyone has to operate off of. And it seems, what's so great about sports is it's like we keep slicing and dicing all of these parts of the human physiology and trying to optimize them. And it's incredible. I mean, that's probably why people continue to break records, because we're looking at so many more things and applying so much more science to discrete markers of performance. And I would love to dive in a little bit on what you did with them specifically in terms of like, how do you go about managing a team of athletes? And I guess off the top of my head, you would imagine like, what does a football player need versus maybe like an F1 driver, right? There's probably some metabolic different requirements and different things, but then how do you decide what a football team needs? And then how do you decide what each player needs? Like, what did you set up for them and how did you manage it?
Yeah, and to me, the answer to that is why it needs to be a full time someone there all the time, ingrained, understanding all those variables. Because, now in my current role with Thorne, I do a bit of consulting with our partners or teams and whatnot, and you just can't get the level. I can make some really great recommendations and tweak some things here and there, but you have to really be ingrained. So, but to take a step back, it really does go back to my clinical training and the way I kind of view everything. It's what we now know as the high performance model is the grand rounds model, right? When I was working ICU, we had this patient, here's what's happening with them. Here's the truths. What's from your lens? You're the expert in this. What's, you know, pathology, what's your lens? Nutrition, what's your lens? Social work, PT, all this stuff. So it kind of really brought that model. I can't do my job without the information of everybody else, right? So
Yeah.
part of it is, having that information, but I would say you have to be kind of a mix of a professor and a coach, right? You can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you can't coach and relate to people or understand what their kind of drivers are, you're not really going to make the impact you want to. And I made the mistake early in my career where I wanted to fix everything all at once, but in reality, there's a readiness, there's a coachability, and for some of the players, it was just like, oh, you cramped during games. Okay, let's start there. And then like, wait, you help me with this. You care about me. Like, what can you do? I'm also having this problem, right? But I
Yeah.
guess an even a bigger approach that I've kind of evolved into over making many mistakes and learning from them is really at the global level. It's the human level, right? Like I said, there's it is intentional trauma, but excuse me. I spent the early part of my career trying to get that one or two extra at the top end. of performance and see how we can maximize that. But, as I went back to my roots and realized, like, I've said it 100 times, 20 years in human performance, 80% of what I do is on the human, right? So if the human's functioning at 50% of optimal, 2% on the top of that is not as significant as if we take care of and the human is working pretty well.
Yeah.
And then we get 2% on the top of that. So a lot of it is, assessing, I call it biological cost. What's the biological cost of being a football player, of running a marathon? Like, what are you asking your body to do above and beyond just survival? And then what are those nutrients and what are the solutions for them to either, provide you enough to do the thing you want to do and then recover from it and do it again tomorrow. Right. So it
Yeah.
really does come back to, I would say that the body is the most simple, complex machine in the world. Right. Like there's certain
Yeah.
truths that have to be
Un-
accounted for before it'll do anything else. So, a lot of what we do is like, looking at common deficiencies, whether it's vitamin D or magnesium. Is it, do you have enough fuel? Like, are your carbohydrate needs there to do the deed? Are your protein requirements there to respond to it? So a lot of times it's simple, and a lot of times it's timing too. It's too many people have
yeah.
a great idea and they're doing the right things, but they're like, I don't know, take that at night or take this around exercise. So the first year, a lot of it was just establishing those habits and really just, making sure the food supply was there. We were feeding them as often as we needed to. Um, and then kind of doing the one-offs as things came up and as people got to trust me and understand why I was there. Right. Because
Yeah.
too early in the profession, everyone's like, oh, you're the food police. You're going to put me on a diet. And I was like, well, rarely does a football player need to lose weight, right? We're struggling to
Yeah,
keep the
exactly.
size on. So, and then from there, yeah, it does evolve into everybody does have to have their own individual needs, right? Like playing the sport is only a couple hours a day, right? Like,
Yeah.
are you diabetic? Are you, do you have a sleep issue? Do you have this? Do you have that? So you really do have to treat the whole human in order to really get that top end profession or performance. I would say the body is a survival machine, and the more kind of red lights, warning signs you can turn off, the more intelligent it becomes about doing the thing it wants to do.
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of people, and I've made the same mistake too at the beginning. I've also coached a lot of athletes, and you try to save the world, right? You try to like or force people down a framework, and instead of just addressing the lowest hanging fruit or what's going to kill them first, like if you're just looking at a person who wants to live a long time, it's like, well, where's the bottleneck in your physiology? What's going to kill you first? Do you have like, lipid disorder? Do you have metabolic disorder? Like, what is the problem? And then also from like athletes, like you said, the cramping or, they're not recovering. I used to work with athletes and, they come in and they were just never, some people were never recovered. Like they just were always sore and beat up. I'm like, you're probably not eating enough protein or no, I would get them on essential aminos. I'd get them on Thorne's essential aminos, just so this is an elegant way to be able to build more out of the protein that you're already eating. You get more utilization out of it. And so I imagine that like for me, it has become more about just sort of saying, let's go after the big things and first the low hanging fruit, and then let's keep fine tuning and fine tuning and fine tuning. Are you guys looking at biomarkers? Are you like testing their blood? Are you doing genetic testing?
Yeah, for sure. You kind of have to, like I said, again, it all comes back to the medical nutrition therapy model that I was kind of raised in, right? Like I wouldn't make feeding or fueling decisions, on a patient IV feeding without biomarkers, without blood work, without reading the medical chart and being fully informed. So, there's definitely recommendations you can make for the whole, but it really does come down to look. I mean, there's so many systems happening in the body at any time. You really do have to take that informed approach, but and the more data points you have, the better, right? Now it can get overwhelming, and as we have access to more and more data points with wearables, we are seeing people get overwhelmed by that. Like you kind of
Yeah.
sometimes need to be like, okay, I this is how this makes me feel. This is what these numbers mean to me. But understanding like you're not necessarily the expert to have thought of all the variables, right? So we do
Yeah.
see some people, either responding negatively to a potential, sleep tracker, or a lot of people wearing glucose monitoring and don't understand that your glucose is supposed to fluctuate throughout the day. That's
Yeah.
how it works, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you do kind of need biomarkers, and I always kind of compare it to I don't know why this sticks in my head, but there was a Carfax commercial, and they're like, I want a red car, and it's like, the million cars go down to 1,000. All right, I want 4 doors, right? And then so the more data points I have, the more I can give you kind of a sniper approach where it's a one size fits one recommendation as opposed to yeah, it's gonna help, right? As opposed
Yeah.
to okay, this is 100% gonna make you better or make you feel kind of I would say minimize the suck of training and
Yeah.
performing, right? So
Yeah.
I think the more we know, the better. But you do have to wait. And what I love about Thorne is they're very responsible about testing a biomarker without confidence, right? Like you mentioned genetics, and it's insane. The price of testing your genome has come down so much, and it's relatively
Yeah.
affordable as technology improves. But we don't know every marker and what's going to express and whatnot. So, I've seen people take these tests and make these lifetime or lifelong decisions on something that may have a 10% chance of expressing. So,
Yeah.
are you unnecessarily limiting yourself? It's all super good information, but a lot of times we're not there yet. Right. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. To me, it
yeah,
seems like,
it's a interesting world. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it seems like to me, you use those tests to see what potentially could be expressed, and then you maybe use some other like testing like blood to see, is this actually showing up? Like maybe if you don't convert beta carotene to vitamin A, or you have the MTHFR gene variant, then those things will start to show up in real time on other tests, especially if you get stressed or overworked. But the genetics is, it's super interesting, but people I think sometimes underestimate epigenetics, and that things are turning off and on depending on what your behavior is and what you're doing.
No, I think the example I always use to kind of explain it to people is, and I do think what I love about the speed at which science is evolving is that things are making sense to a lot of people. Like a lot of times, like caffeine's the perfect example. So genetic, we know there's fast metabolizers, slow metabolizers, and super slow metabolizers. And if you looked at caffeine and the research, it was like, may help, may not. And then we figured out that those 3 specific genomes, and if you overlay those on top of the data, it's very obvious. Fast metabolizer, this is a performance enhancer. Slow metabolizer, that it's actually not. Like,
Yeah.
probably should avoid at certain times, right? So
Yeah.
I like that science is kind of explaining things for us, but it's until we get that confidence level that make things make sense. So I actually go the opposite way. I go backwards. I kind of do the assessment of somebody like, what are your pain points? What sucks for you? What would you like to improve? And a lot of times is in the athletic world, and really all of us, we kind of normalize the suck, and you shouldn't have to like make those noises when you wake up every morning, or you shouldn't athletes just assume their gut's going to be screwed up. Like, it doesn't have to be true. So is that limiting? Like, that's the number one thing that's limiting you. Like you said, I'm not trying to fix every potential disease state. Let's fix the biggest one, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I kind of go backwards and like, okay, here are the data points that can inform us on that specific issue. And then what I love biomarkers for is proving that what you're changing and what you're doing with intention is working, right? Like for
Yeah.
years, I was like, I think this is working. And now as science improves and as wearables, you can be like, okay, yeah, I did this and my sleep got better, or my bench went up, or my mile time went down. Like making those real world connections and really being kind of your own, running your own research study on yourself. I think
Yeah.
that's where kind of the magic is empowering people to be I would say you need to be the CEO of your own health, right? And yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, build a really strong board of directors and advisors, but at the same point, you're the only one that knows everything about you. So I think that's kind of the way I approach biomarkers, is really empowering the individual to make those decisions and kind of do that self-assessment and see what's happening.
Yeah. And if you can show that these biomarkers are moving in a more positive direction and correlate that with their performance, that's job security, right? I mean, it's irrefutable in a way. But I agree with you. I think that the person has an innate intelligence. If you ask someone, if you keep asking them questions, what do you feel is wrong with this? And why do you feel this is, they know. It's just that maybe they've been kind of just accepting it or thinking there's no possible solution, but they know what they need a lot of the times, in my opinion. Like, they know what their bottlenecks are, so to speak. But what do you do if someone comes to you and they have this great idea where they're like, I just decided I want to go vegan, or I want to do the ketogenic diet, or I want to be carnivore. Did you come up to any of those in the professional athletic realm?
Yeah, and I've kind of distilled my philosophy on that is there are no yeses or nos. There's yes if or no unless, right? And to me, if you're willing to do it, if you're willing to take intention, and a lot of times, if you are going to follow a specific diet, it works because you are more aware of what you're doing and you're paying attention to things that I wish you had been paying attention all along, right? So for me, it's all right. Yes, I'm going to go vegan. Cool. Is now the time to do it? Is the middle of the season time to do it? This is what's going to happen as you switch over, or cool, you're going to go vegan. These are the nutrients that are largely missing. These are what needs to be true in your vegan diet, the mix of foods you need to kind of be checking all these boxes. So to me, I'm I'm pretty adverse to saying no to anyone. If it's something they're passionate about. Now, obviously, educate, inform, and sometimes it's just like cool, but you're gonna not perform the way you want to, right? But
Yeah.
it's here's a version of this we can do, or here's the steps we need to do to ease into that. So, but yeah, like you said, the everybody's pretty innately intelligent about what they are and how they feel, and to me, it's always rarely does an athlete lie, right? If they're
Yeah.
feeling something and we can't figure it, that's on the science team. That's why there's an expert in each field to figure out, okay, this guy is, his performance drops off in the fourth quarter. Why? It's not an effort thing. We know that, right? Like
Yeah.
obviously their behaviors have gotten them to this point in their career, right? So it's, is it a fueling issue? Is it a, overuse issue? Is it a mental focus and just, the brain's not getting enough nutrients to be making the decisions as fast as it was at the beginning
Yeah.
of the game? Like if an athlete's feeling something, it's generally true. It's up to us to support that athlete with some information and figure out if we can figure out what is causing that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, let's talk about Thorne because I'm sure this is a whole topic that I mean, you're now with Thorne, right? And you're the director of
Yeah.
what is your role there now?
So I'm the director of sports science. So Thorne's kind of a 40-year legacy company in the health and wellness space. So for the first 30 years, you had to go through a healthcare practitioner and we still don't think anyone should blindly just take supplements without some guidance, right? So we don't want people just blindly taking supplements and making like because it has to be in the right form, it has to be absorbable, it has to be the right time of day and understanding. So again, the more we can inform you to make those CEO of you decisions, right?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so my role is to kind of work on the performance side. So, I went from, life and death in the ICU to wins and losses, right? But supporting any of our partners or anyone who's really trying to make a performance goal, like optimization as opposed to just health and wellness, right? Or
Yeah.
kind of being the best human you can be to now be like, all right, let's go above and beyond what kind of just average survival is. So that's kind of where I do. And it's everything from, a lot of times we'll work with organizations like we're partnered with the UFC. They have a phenomenal high performance team. So I'm really just a resource to them. And then there's other organizations that really have no budget, or it's an individual athlete that needs kind of a real full on, let's do blood work. Let's look at you. Right. So I get to do really all the fun things I love to do. Right. And then there's
No,
a
that's
huge education side of it. Yeah. It's a great place to be.
yeah, I bet. The one thing I do love about working with athletes and having been one is that they will do what it takes. If you decide to work with them, automatically the discipline is inherently baked into their, the way they are. So they're not kicking the tires. They're wanting answers and they want to implement and try things. So they're extremely enjoyable to work with. And the interesting thing about performance versus like health and wellness is performance can imply I'm redlining my system in a measured enough way where if I want to win first at something, and maybe you have a philosophy around this, I'd like to hear it. But if my goal is to win, that doesn't mean that I'm optimizing for maximum health. It means that I'm
Mhm.
optimizing for maximum performance. So you're willing to say, I'm going to take a hit in some of these things, whether it's inflammation or, maybe you express a little bit about what somebody, when they're optimizing for performance, what are some of the things you really have to look after so that you're not cutting off the health of the person to some capacity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of why we've seen such the kind of the growth of the high performance model is people who have the information to realize what they did to themselves to stay at that highest level, right? And realizing, all right, what can we do to mitigate that while it's happening, right? Yeah, there's some things like, hey, running a marathon is not smart for survival. The body doesn't want
Yeah.
to do it, right? Like there's a ton of negatives that happen, right? Like anyone, the Tuesday after Boston Marathon this week, nobody's feeling great, right?
Yeah.
But it is like, okay, this is my truth. This is what's going to happen. What it goes back to biological costs. What do I need to do that and fuel my body so it's not tapping into these systems that are going to cause more damage? Because the body will always survive, right?
Yeah.
In the athletic world, it's just a matter of how can we make it easier for it. And you know, for a long time there was this idea of overtraining, and I think while that can still happen, I think a lot of it is mislabeled as under recovery. So it is
Yep.
understanding that it's not just the 2 hours you're competing. It's one, I'm going to ask my body to do this over and over again and get better while doing it. And you can't do that without, taking care of recovery, whether it is, physical recovery, biological, metabolic recovery, mental recovery. And you have to have all of those, right? You have to have an answer for all of those to stay at the highest level. You have to minimize the negatives that intentional trauma that comes with training, right? So a
Yeah.
lot of it is just having a plan and an answer for everything. But I think a lot of us do that kind of in the day-to-day world, right? Like athletes it is great to work with athletes because one, the readiness is there. They want to do things to improve them, right? And they've, generally had access to some great people around that. So their baseline knowledge is a little bit higher. But, all of us have these kind of pain points in our life where we sacrifice. We're like, yeah, all right, well, yeah, I'm gonna go out and have a drink after work, and I know tomorrow morning's gonna stink, right?
Yeah.
Same kind of thing as that. Like I'm going to run this marathon. I know I'm going to hurt, right? But the reality is, you can do that same kind of philosophy. Like, okay, what am I asking my body to do? All right, do I hydrate before? Are there some electrolytes? Whatever, like anything. And
Yeah.
I'm just using that as a kind of an example. But same thing. Like if I've got, I'm giving a presentation, I know my stress level is going to be high. I have to be smart enough to do some things for myself that I know are strategies that work for me to kind of minimize my stress, so that I can be optimal Joel when I'm giving that presentation. So
Yeah.
the idea does translate kind of into the general population as well. And it really just comes down to what are you asking your body to do, and how are you going to support it to do anything above baseline?
Yeah. Let me ask you this. What separates Thorne? Because I'm always trying to tell people, don't go buying your supplements on Amazon. Yeah, there's a lot of counterfeits out there. There's a lot of expired supplements that have been sitting on shelves for a long time. And there's a lot of supplements that have been run on machines that were one run versus many. You don't know what fragments of, were left on from the previous runs. Like, why should somebody choose Thorne? What makes you guys different and special?
Yeah. I found Thorne working through athletics because I knew there were certain, I'm informed in the industry to some degree at the time. And I knew there's a difference between really good supplementation that's actually to do what I wanted to do, and then things that are labeled that may not be, we've had someone in our company made an analogy recently. The drop off between, the highest level of supplements to the lowest is probably bigger than it is like, farmers market or Whole Foods to McDonald's, right? They're both,
Yeah.
beef, but there's a
Yeah.
difference in how your body uses them and how they kind of work. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is a lot of supplement companies are kind of really the way I look at it is they're marketing companies that are selling a product, and then there's the few supplement companies that are, they make their own products. So a lot of supplement companies, it's kind of the ingredients are coming from these major manufacturers, and they're just kind of picking their specs and putting their label on it. But there's not many supplement companies you can go and visit the facility, right?
Yeah.
You can visit their website, but there's no physical structure where they're actually producing them. And that's kind of where Thorne's different. And it goes back to our legacy of doing this for 40 years. But, by doing that, we have, I think at this point, over 30 credentialed healthcare practitioners that are full-time, right? It's not just an advisory board. Like the fact that my job exists within Thorne and I'm one of, many, whose job is to make sure we're doing everything right. We're educating people the right way. The research is there to make you make these decisions for yourself. I think that's different. And then by manufacturing your own products, we have a very strong control on ingredients and quality. And so I don't know, I'd say like early 2000s, there were some bad players who were intentionally spiking their products with bad ingredients. But then there's kind of the secondary, like, is it gonna work the way I want it to, right? Like, it's not a bad product. It's just not, if I'm, using numbers, but say you think you're getting 20 grams of protein, but it's in that 20 grams, 5% of it's filler, and then it's only absorbed at 70% instead of 90%. So at the end of the day, how much usable protein are you getting there, right? So
Yeah.
not that it's a bad product, it's just not doing what you think it is, right? And then the
Yeah.
whole idea of absorption, I've got a colleague that said it's not you are what you eat, it's are what you eat and can absorb, right? And that's a lot of
Yeah.
times we'll see, you put, to make a multivitamin, at the start there may have been those ingredients in it, but is your body, the binders, fillers, and the form, is it going to break down in the right place in the body? So the nutrients that are supposed to be absorbed in small intestine are absorbed there and not broken down and denatured beforehand. So those are all things you have to like put work into, and it's hard to make that final product the one that the body is going to use optimally. And that's where it takes a company that is really doing the work and putting it in there. We've got
Yeah.
a full on quality control lab. We've got, we're always doing research, not just on potential new products, but our existing products, and partnering with some really great, trusted partners and research companies outside of the company. So it's not just like, here's this paper we wrote about our product that solves the exact problem we wanted to find, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it is
Exactly.
there is a responsibility, I think, because you are dealing with health and wellness and people's really, kind of performance, but health and wellness is even bigger than performance. There's a responsibility and kind of an ethics to make sure that what you're putting out, what you're saying is you're not hiding anything. There's full transparency so that
Yeah.
everybody can make that individual decision for themselves. So I think that's what a lot of people don't understand about the industry. It's not just like, all right, I got this banana from this store. Like I can look at it, I can see it's a banana, right?
Yeah.
But then there's, uh, when it comes to supplementation, people like it's not something people are super well informed on and don't understand the what needs to be true, the checks and balances that need to happen in order for the supplement to be something that you want to put in your body, and is it going to work the way you think it is.
Yeah. I mean, I look at supplements similar to food in the sense that you can buy a piece of meat and you can buy your vegetables, but there's a big difference between just going to any grocery store and getting any traditional meat that is laced with antibiotics and fed a grain diet as opposed to feeding on grass like with your meat, or fish that's been wild caught versus farmed, or your vegetables that have been biodynamically grown where the soil is optimized for, where the nutrients are still there versus just traditional farming practices where it's single crop. And supplements are very similar in the sense that I think you're being very kind, and the supplement industry to me is borderline criminal in some aspects because it's not regulated by the FDA. So people can put in whatever they want, and like you said, they're marketing companies. They're bringing in this stuff from China. There's really minimal quality control. They're slapping a label on this without even getting into, are these the types of molecules or compounds or nutrients that are bioavailable? They're in the right form that the body can use, as opposed to just being like, ugh. And when I try to sell people on Thorne, I say, look, each supplement's tested 4 times for purity. They have a team of researchers and doctors that formulate their supplements. They're held to the highest manufacturing standards in the world. I mean, you guys have that Australian manufacturing certificate, right? Where you get randomly audited and you've passed. And there was this interesting thing I read on your website like years ago that was less than, I think it's out of the 15,000 supplement manufacturers globally, some tiny, tiny percentage gets randomly audited. And of the ones that do, a third of them fail. Do you know that statistic?
Yeah. So there's a couple different things you can look at. So a lot of our products that we use for athletes are what's called NSF certified for sports. That's an outside company that's a quality control company, or minimizing what they do. But so we do a ton of testing inside. Very few companies do the amount of testings we do to make sure what we're putting out is what's on the label. But that's an example of one where we send those products out to make sure that they're a guarantee outside of our company that they're guaranteed banned substance free. So any drug tested athlete can, have some uh, assurance that, or some peace of mind that, okay, this has been tested, this has been looked at, this has been, I know if I'm taking only this and this only, this is not a source of contamination, right? So,
Yeah.
but the first step in that is it has to be made so that's every batch of that product has to be certified. So, okay, if I took this bottle, this is a certified lot, right? But the first step in doing that is to be an NSF certified facility. And that's a pretty massive undertaking where they look at everything, like what people wouldn't, and I didn't think about it until I got into the industry. Like, we don't allow wooden pallets into the facility because they could be a source of contamination, right? So that's things like an NSF audit we'll look at, and it's pretty stringent. And yeah, there are companies that are, there are companies that are just cheating, and then there's companies that are like, oh, I didn't even know to think about that because they're not
Yeah.
historically in this industry, right? Like, especially, and it's a whole other conversation. But with the rise of like social media influencers, where
Oh my
somebody's like, all right,
God.
we're going to
Yeah.
make this company, we're going to hire this person, and no one on that side of the business is educated on what goes into making a supplement, and really what they're putting their name on. So
I've seen
yeah,
it.
so it is a pretty, yeah, it's crazy.
It's
And
nuts. I
that's
mean,
all we could do an hour on that, but
yeah, I mean, I've seen companies that do 100 million in sales that are a small team of very young marketers, and there is no underpinnings of a real supplement company there. It's all 100% a marketing company, and this is stuff that you're putting in your body to try to make yourself more healthy. I tell people, go with somebody who has been through all of the proper channels and it holds themselves to a standard that would allow people to use them in clinical trials all over the world. There's a reason why Thorne is used in clinical trials, right? Because what's on the bottle is in the bottle. So you're not tainting a very expensive study, right?
yeah, and I think the big issue there is just an awareness. Like if I go to the grocery store and I get a thing of peaches canned in heavy syrup, I'm under no illusion that that's the same as a peach I picked off a tree in Georgia, right? But with
Yeah.
supplements, it's not that easy, right? So a lot of things I tell people look for to find the good companies like Thorne are, if you go to the website, do they have education, right? Are they trying to inform you, right? Are there healthcare practitioners that are using them, or, that are kind of referenced? And then I'll recommend, doing a little research and finding, a doctor, dietitian, or healthcare practitioner, or, a hospital system, or like a .edu type website, right? And look
Yeah.
at what form, like if you're like, hey, I want to take magnesium, right? Going, okay, this is the form magnesium glycinate is the one we use a lot. Is this company providing in that form, right? So there are some things you can do to learn. Okay, this is the difference between a supplement company that I at least feel good about, is doing the work and taking the extra steps, right? Like you're not forced to be an NSF certified facility, right? You're forced to
Yeah.
be NSF certified for sport if you want to work in professional sports, right? But what are there companies that are going above and beyond and doing those things that you wouldn't ask them to, or you don't know to ask them to, but they're doing it anyway and have been, right? So I think that's a good
Yeah.
way to kind of start educating yourself on what you're putting in your body, right? So that you can
Yeah.
make those kind of educated decisions. But yeah, for me, it's always, are they providing education? Are there, if they link you to more information about the product and there's not a link to the article they're quoting, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I kind of start to ask myself why, right? And it doesn't mean, it doesn't mean they don't have those references, they don't have those, scientists on their team, but show your work, right? So I
Yeah.
think there's something to that, and working with athletes specifically, even before the social media influencers, I would say like if you read the label in like monster truck voice, there's just tons of adjectives, and it's like blazing intensity. Like that's not a biological term,
Like,
right? And then the other thing to kind of think about is, but under FDA regulation and the Federal Trade Commission, which kind of governs what you can say about a product, no supplement can cure anything, right? So if
yeah.
it's curing anything or treating anything or using any of those words, making claims about, really impacting disease states, that's not a company that's following the rules. Right.
Yeah.
So if they're not following them on how they talk about the product, that's a pretty big red flag that you want to do a little bit more work there. So yeah, supplements can, what they're, they supplement a diet, right? They supplement what the body can do. So, you can improve the body's response to inflammation or response to training, but you can't, uh, like if a supplement says, for example, anti-inflammatory is not a thing you can say about a supplement. No supplements are approved to treat inflammation, right?
Yeah.
But we can know what the body does in the response to inflammation, right? So while that
Yeah.
sounds nuanced, those kind of things, yeah, if it's treating a condition that's not something that's allowed in America. So if they're making those claims, then that's pretty quick red flag that they're probably not doing the quality control to make sure that product is what you want to put in your body.
Yeah, and Thorne can end up being not as sexy as some social media, like just rogue supplement company that is making some of these blazing, what did you call it? Blazing, I don't know
Oh
what you
yeah,
said.
blazing intensity or
White
blazing
hot
heat's another great.
white.
Yeah.
But, well, look, you know what I would like to talk about is a little bit of some strategy around some of your NSF or sports line of supplements, because I've used all of them, most likely, and there are a few. I haven't used your Cinequil or maybe the recovery protein. Maybe let's start with vitamin D, the vitamin that's so important that you make it from the sun, so it's baked into our physiology, right? But then you have these kids or athletes who will be in school all day long, so they're indoors, and then they drive to a gym, and then they might train 4 or 5 hours in an indoor facility, and then they go through some sort of puberty where their bones are growing, right? And then you always see these stress fractures that come up during these time periods of when they're growing. And to me, there's some pretty staggering statistics on your website related to vitamin D deficiency with athletes. Could you maybe just talk about the importance of vitamin D and a little bit of the use case for that?
Yeah, so I think vitamin D is a perfect example of when to supplement, right? Like, I'm a dietitian. We always say food first, right? But sometimes food's not enough, right? And either in the case of vitamin D, there's just not that many great sources of vitamin D in the diet. Like it does, sun exposure is a major part of it. And if you're living north of Atlanta for half the year, the sun's not strong enough, even if you're outside training, right? And then you add sunscreen and protective clothing, all these things that, we use for different reasons, those all kind of block, or, you're a football player and you're wearing a helmet and, your face is blocked, right? And your eyes are blocked, right? So that is something where we see, I mean, it's an issue in the population deficiency as well. But then you look at athletes who are asking more of their bodies, like, are their needs higher? And then, we actually worked with NFL combine guys, and we didn't wasn't an intervention study. We just took a snapshot, right, of all these athletes coming from Power Five conferences where they have unlimited feeding, they have dietitians, they have all this stuff around them, and things like vitamin D and magnesium were on the lower end for a lot of these athletes. Pretty staggering number. So it is just kind of going to show that, sometimes the diet just isn't adequate, or the diet you're eating, right? Like I could probably design a perfect diet, but unless you have all the commitment in the world, a personal chef, right? Is your diet actually meeting those needs? So a lot of times it is falling short. And then there's the whole conversation, and then science is improving. We kind of went back to the biomarkers, but is there such thing as the difference between adequate for survival and optimal for performance, right? So that's
Yeah.
where we're looking at too, like, vitamin D, for example, if you get to say 30 nanograms is your level, is 50 better, but 100 bad, right? Those are all things where
Yeah.
the science is looking at to kind of understand, like, okay, there's recommendations to like not be deficient or not promote negative situations of the body. And then is there something where there is an optimal level, right? And that's
Yeah.
kind of where it comes back to the education and what I feel a responsible company, um, anyone that's kind of making recommendations around health and wellness, is where's the show your work, right? Like you
Yeah.
mentioned, Thorne, we have a pretty extensive um, blog series where, you start reading about vitamin D. There's 6 other articles you can read about to inform yourself. And each one of those has references if you want to dig in and nerd out about it, right? So,
Yeah.
it does go back to both the responsibility of the company to educate so that you're making those decisions, and then you kind of really taking the responsibility to understanding like, okay, is a supplement the right answer for me, right? And then
Yeah.
there's other supplements like whey protein, for example, or amino complex, as you mentioned. Yeah, there's plenty of ways to get 20 grams of protein, or leucine's the kind of amino acid that triggers kind of muscle recovery to kind of stop the breakdown and start the recovery process. And you need about 2.5 grams, give or take, depending on who you read. But I can get that from a chicken breast. I can get that from a scoop of whey. But for me personally, and the earlier you turn it on, the earlier the recovery starts, right? But for me, my gut is not accepting of even a protein
Yeah.
shake isn't going to make me feel great. So then it's like, okay, amino acid, let's take the leucine. But if you take leucine alone, there's a reason that like a proteins are a whole, kind of mix of amino acids, right? So then we had like the science was like, all right, leucine's important for this, but the rest are for muscle, kind of recovery turn on, but the rest of the body's still happening. So
Yeah.
we need to provide it in the presence of the other essential amino acids, right? So it's that kind of degree of detail. Like, yes, I can show you this research paper that says leucine's important, but then let's take a step back and realize, okay, why are whole proteins, why would they be better? Okay, let's answer for that. And then it's that's when it is the informed decision, but you have to be educated enough to know that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for someone like me, I work out a lot, and to me, I'm almost 50, and to keep an appreciable amount of muscle on my body, I think is correlated with longevity. I don't want to be fragile when I'm older. I want to be very active. And as we get older, we start losing, a pound of muscle on average every year because of sarcopenia. We become resistant to anabolic sort of signaling. And for me, protein is one of those things that, of all the things that I would count, that's the one that I'm usually keeping track of. I'm really good listening to my hunger hormones about my energy, but when it comes to protein, and for me, I it just is protein is difficult to digest, especially as you get older. You might need some digestive enzymes because you're not making as many digestive enzymes to break this stuff down. I mean, 30% of the calories of protein are used just in the digestion of protein. It's very interesting. So for me, something like a whey protein or an amino complex is a godsend in order to be able to reach a level of that I wanna reach without shoving a ton of food down the pipe, so to speak, and potentially affecting my digestion.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of just why like we kind of educate around supplements is it's an option, right? Like for me,
Yeah.
like I travel often trying to get quality protein sources in an airport, not just necessarily something my body wants to
Good
digest and then
luck.
sit on a plane for 6 hours, right? So I always travel with amino complex, and for me, I'm using that as a cheat code to protein or just an alternate solution, right? But kind of as you mentioned, it's okay. Truth, I need X amount of protein per day. Yeah, I can do it through food choices. I can do it by behavior changes. Like, okay, I'm going to make sure I have this protein containing snack, whatever, in the middle of my already full feeling. Or it's, I don't want to cook 3 eggs in the morning, but I will do a protein shake, right? So it's just,
Yeah,
there's things like vitamin D where it's like, okay, this isn't necessarily a great choice, source in the diet. And then there is kind of, am I using supplements as just a tool, right? So I think
yeah,
there's kind of a different ways to look at it. Um, but again, it is an option, but you have to be pretty intentional about who you're choosing. So just as you would with your food, right? So you want to know
yeah,
where it comes from, how it's made, how the body uses it, what quality is it. So yeah, to me, it's supplements are there to supplement a diet, but they are a true solution for a lot of people for a lot of different situations.
yeah. I mean, I agree with you 100% on the airplane. I won't touch a piece of airplane food. I mean, I'll usually even take like some ketones or something just to kind of get me through the flight, or I'll just fast. There's some interesting stuff where when you eat, your body turns on mTOR and your DNA will expose so it can be read. And then that's where the radiation in the plane can actually break apart and get some double-stranded break DNAs. So when you're fasting, when you're on an airplane, the DNA is coiled up and it's protected more. And I mean, this is kind of nuanced, and probably some people are like, Jesus, that's way over the top. But I just don't eat airplane food, period, because I just think it's absolute garbage. But that's a little side note. But you have brought up
Yeah.
magnesium a couple of times, and correct me if I'm wrong. Magnesium is the second most deficient nutrient in the standard American diet, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of it's one of those, it doesn't get as much attention as vitamin D. And 10 years ago, I was still convincing people that vitamin D or was something that you should be at least aware of, right? So magnesium, it's kind of dropped in our soil, right? So it's not similar to vitamin D. It's just not as prevalent in the diet. And it is one that does your needs change the more you do or the more you ask your body to do. It's involved in like 600 enzymatic reactions, so it
Yeah.
touches kind of everything. But it's until like relatively recent. You have to get an extra blood test to see your kind of true levels,
The red
because it
blood
does,
said the
it's in bone. Yeah, right. So red blood cell magnesium can tell you, just like vitamin D, you have to do the serum vitamin D, like that'll tell you more of what's actually happening in your body. And now that's pretty much the standard. But yeah, so a lot of people that aren't aware of kind of the prevalence of magnesium deficiency or insufficiency or suboptimal, whichever levels you want to look at. But for me, because it's involved in so many different things, it is, if I had to pick a favorite nutrient, I think it's one that a lot of people see benefit from, both in, muscle health. And for me, it kind of helps me kind of get in that idea of sleeping, right? Like nothing in
yeah.
magnesium sedates you, but as you're kind of switching into that, and especially me all over the place, different time zones or being active, like when my clock tells me I should sleep and when my lifestyle tells me I should sleep, not necessarily in the same
Yeah.
place. So,
Yeah.
and it's, if you think about it, magnesium, Epsom salts are magnesium. It's why we take Epsom
Yeah.
salt baths to kind of relax the muscles outside in. Similar kind of role in the body. But yeah, it's involved in so many different things. And where science is looking at it more and more. So, if you were to Google Scholar magnesium, it's people are looking at it in so many different ways. So, yeah, and it's a core mineral. It's
Yeah. I,
something
I,
that traditionally was involved in our diet pretty frequently, and it's one of the ones that is, from soil content and different reasons, has kind of dropped in our food supply. So that's why it's kind of crept up as a deficiency for a lot of people.
yeah. I mean, I've heard you just can't, you pretty much almost impossible to get it from the diet. Just a lot of the leafy greens and all this stuff have been, as the time it's harvested and it's sitting on the shelves and then it's sitting in your drawer in your refrigerator all that time, it's starting to lose its potency. But for me, I don't think I've missed a magnesium supplementation in over a decade. I mean, maybe I could count them on one hand. Yeah, obviously, there has been a few times, but for me, I think magnesium is. I love it. I was listening to this guy, Chris Master John. He's a PhD nutritionist, and do you know who he is? And
I know that. Yeah, I don't know him personally, but yeah.
yeah, and he has this supplement guide for non people like you that are like really, really, versed in the subject, but he kind of boils the stuff down. And if you just stripped everything away from magnesium, it would be you needed to make protein and you needed to make energy. And I agree with you. Sleep, when it's chelated with glycinate, which is already an inhibitory neurotransmitter, super relaxing. Magnesium in itself is soothing and calming. And I just think it's a perfect, um, very first one to put in your sleep stack. If you're trying to devise a sleep stack, it's like, well, make sure you got your magnesium glycinate first because you probably already are deficient in some capacity in magnesium. Have you seen or know about these calcium voltage channels that get triggered from EMF? And so EMF basically allows calcium to pour into these cells, and it's making the magnesium kind of protects against that. Have you done any research on that?
I'm aware of the concept. I can't speak with confidence to it. I need to, educate myself a little bit more before I try and make any recommendations to anybody listening. But yeah, it's to me that's just it's. I love the access to science that we have is kind of improving, so you can do a little bit more research and inform yourself. But yeah, I mean, magnesium, calcium, they're both kind of minerals that both kind of play in the same way. So there is always, a question like, do I take them together? Do I take them separately? And depending on what you're trying to do, the answer may be different. So it's one of those, I would say, like, I think I know we can prove. And, until we get to the, like, if you're doing a decision for yourself, you're like, all right, it's leaning this way. And from what I've read, there's no, like, warning signs or things I shouldn't do. So if it's a
Yeah.
first do no harm and the research is leading that way and you're doing it yourself, but for me as a practitioner to really make a recommendation on anything, it has to be the what we can prove.
Yeah.
So what I may
Yeah.
do as my N of one study on myself is a little different than what I would, be able to be on record saying. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting, and that's where I love science and I love the access to it, which is double-edged sword because it's harder to find, the true sources of resources and not just like a cherry picked. We always hear like some wild headline, and then 2 days later, all the experts come out and be like they cherry picked this little bit of information,
Yeah.
didn't read the rest of the study, and that's not what it said at all, right? So,
Yeah.
I think generally if it's a sensational headline, wait a couple of days and see what the consensus is from people you
Yeah.
trust.
I think you're absolutely well. It is 100% correct what you're saying. Let me ask you about fish oil because fish oil has been really one of those supplements for me. Just improved my cardiovascular panel. A lot of people in the standard American diet are getting a ton of omega sixes. Their ratio of omega threes to omega sixes is way off. And we need omega sixes, but when they're that far off, you need it for what? Blood clotting. It is a pro-inflammatory, whereas the omega threes, like the fish oil, are non-inflammatory, right? And so that balance, and for me, from like my joints, my blood flow, it was it was paramount for me. Like to me, it was one of those things that I could really feel the difference when I dialed in my fish oil, and I use the Super EPA product. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know it's in the athletic, the NSF stuff. So for athletes, what is this providing for them?
Yeah, so it goes back to that foundational part of the treating the human and human performance. So I mean, fish oil is a perfect example. There's three macronutrients. It's protein, carbs, and fat, right? And it's a little bit easier to make, smart carbohydrate sources, knowing depending on what you want, fast or slow energy, right? Protein, there's all kinds of education on what quality protein are, or what the body absorbs. But fats aren't as easy for people to put a handle on. So to me, omega threes, and whether it's from fish oil, and fish oil is a good source of omega threes because of the algae they eat, right? So they have a good diet, so their
Yeah.
oils are kind of healthful. But it goes to me, it's a little bit kind of like, yeah, so true. We know having a good balance is great. Um, you know, it's kind of like the protein amino acid, like how many eggs and avocados and salmon can you eat a day? Are you gonna like?
Yeah.
It's just not realistic for me to get, you know, and I'm not, doing shots of olive oil or anything like that. Which there was a
Yeah.
time where that was a fad for
Yeah.
a while. And there's GI considerations of doing that. But yeah, no. So to me, it is like it's pretty undisputed that fats are one of the three major things you need in the diet. They're essential, right? Essential fatty acids, which means you can't make enough in your body, so you have to take them in from the outside. So I think that's a very well known kind of tenet in medical books and nutrition books and whatnot, that healthy fats play all these roles in the body, from skin and membranes to the integrity of your red blood cells to so many different, just like magnesium, it touches so many different things in the body, that having a beneficial source of the right source of fat allows your body to do smart things with it, right?
Yeah.
So for me, yeah, it's just kind of it is the kind of that cheat code's not the right word, but it's just a good backup plan of healthful oils. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's one it's been around, and but and then it comes down to what is the source of it. You have to look at, is farm raised tilapia as good for you as fresh caught? Same thing, is the source of the fish oil you're getting,
Well,
is it
luckily, just
a bunch of other
distilled.
oil, and then yeah, or is it like, you look and there's, I don't know, 1,000 milligrams of fish oil or oil in there, and then you get into it and you're like, oh, I'm really only getting 200
Yeah.
of that 1,000 is the omega three, the EPA or DHA, or the type of fatty acids in omega threes, right?
Yeah.
Is that, and it's, you have to know to look, like you're like, oh well, this one's 5,000 milligram, making these doses up, and this one's 1,000. Like clearly, this one's better. It's 5 times better. But then you look and you're like, oh, they're each providing me 200,
Yeah.
right? So it's one of those,
Yeah.
like, yeah, you have to be an informed consumer to make those decisions.
Yeah. And then for like an athlete, you probably would lean a little bit more on a larger EPA side than you would the DHA. Well, I guess it depends. If you're an F1 driver, you might lean
Right.
more on the DHA, right? But the EPA is more noted for the inflammation aspect, right? whereas the DHA is more for the
Yeah.
brain.
Well, DHA is, yeah. So you hold DHA in your brain, right? It's one of the things that we see if there's any kind of insult to the brain. A lot of times you can get denatured or dropped. So that's why you see it in a lot of concussive protocols, or and on the flip side, developing brain and prenatal and youth and infant when the brain is growing, right? So it's definitely
Yeah.
integrated in the brain quite a bit. But yeah, for me, if you're and I always, there's sometimes where you will take DHA alone, but for me, the body, because the body uses them differently, and even if you're not a Formula One driver, you're making decisions to be an athlete. You're
Yeah.
using your brain to be an athlete, right? So, while EPA and DHA, they have some commonality and some differences in the body. For me, I generally recommend, like, generally you probably need both.
Yeah.
So I generally look for, unless I'm, having an informed decision of why I choose one or the other. To me, I look for like a good mix of both.
What about creatine? Because creatine is a very well studied, it's been around. We're seeing a lot of stuff with brain health with it. I imagine any football player that's taking impact would probably bode well on 5 grams of creatine every single day.
Man, I like, if we had planned this before and you asked me to like play my greatest hits here, you're hitting all my favorites here. But yeah, so
Awesome.
creatine is it's one of the most researched supplements out there, if not the most. So I like that. So there's a body of work to stand on, and further education you can give yourself. But yeah, so creatine, it's one of those things, and this is again an analogy, not true numbers, but say you can hold 10 grams in your muscle, right? The average diet will probably get you to 6, right? So it's just one of those, why not optimize, right? And it provides a
Yeah.
source of energy, right? So in the muscles, that makes sense. But your brain is 20% of your calories are to the brain, right? So that's why it's getting attention around brain health in general, cognition, and then when your brain is dealing with an injury, um, you know the metabolic needs of the brain go up. Just like if you
Yeah.
tear your hamstring, the metabolic needs of the biological needs of the hamstring increase, right? So it is one where, they're looking at, if we provide this energy to the brain, does it have some, outcome, right? So what we do know is that creatine is a source of fuel that can, cross into the blood, crosses the blood-brain barrier. So we know that there's a ton of research then looking at, does creatine, can it impact resiliency, for lack of a better word? Can it shorten the, kind of, or improve their recovery time from a brain injury, or from minor to major? So those are all, like, again, what do we think? What do we know? What can we prove, right? We're in the process of looking at it so that hopefully we can definitively say, yeah, of course, this should be part of your protocol. But on the flip side, just looking at the kind of physiology and metabolism that the brain kind of lives in, yeah, creatine is a source of energy, just like it is for the muscles. And for me, as much as it is, like, if you think about, yeah, it's great for athletes, especially, you see most of the um, hype around creatine, especially in the 90s, was, oh yeah, like, youth, I put 20 pounds on my bench. Well, it's because you're asking your muscles to do more. You're creating new muscles. Your tank's getting bigger. And a lot of times you're, you know, in your youth and you're still growing. So your
Yeah.
tank is actually getting bigger, right? So yeah, you're making adaptations because you're doing more training, right? But I find it more uh, recommended, or I use it a lot more in, like you said, the sarcopenia, just providing the muscle with health, right? And providing muscle the best environment it can possibly be in, um, to be able to continue to do what you want to do. As there are predicted declines in muscle health over time. Like, why not provide it a great source of energy and just create an optimal environment in the muscle? And you
Yeah.
touched on something before about, you know, wanting to age gracefully and quality of life, being able to move. And there's so much information around movement, exercise, muscle health, bone health, and quality of life as you age. But um, to me, I would say, like, performance is personal. So yeah, you may be trying to medal, or you may be trying to just pick up your grandkids, right? Or run a
Yeah.
5K, right? Like, that's as personal to you as it is as any other performance goal. So just kind of taking stock on, okay, what am I asking my body to do? What are ways I can just make it easier for my body to do that? And that's how I boil down nutrition, right? It's just,
Yeah.
if you wait to fix the problem after it's an issue, what can I be giving my body to allow it to perform optimally and do what it wants to do, and just stay at the level I expect it to be at.
Yeah. It's a great point. It's almost like a nice cherry for the end of this podcast, what you just said. For someone like me, I have felt what it's like to be in that tiny 1% of the world and elite level athletics for 12 years. And when I retired, it all went to garbage. I mean, the whole discipline, the rug just got pulled. And I'd made the choice. I said, I want to feel like a professional athlete again. That's the way I want to live. But I'll be a non-professional athlete. I want to feel that way. Now, obviously, I'm not at the same caliber, but I have the same energy. I have no joint pain. I maintain single digit body fat. Like I'm super active. And I'm like, that's my motive, is to go after the health and wellness, and then the performance aspect, to not cross the line on the performance, to not go into something that is going to be detrimental to my longevity, because at the end of the day, that's now the priority. I'm super appreciative. I mean, I really could abuse your time and have you on here, because I would love to cover your Mariva supplement. I mean, I could go down the whole list, but the thing is that Thorne provides a ton of information on their website. I think everyone has probably gleaned from this that you guys are a real, serious, legitimate, in my opinion, the best player in the supplement. I've seen you guys grow. I'm very impressed with the quality of humans that are working for Thorne, like yourself. I cannot thank you enough for coming on to this podcast, because I have been a big advocate of you guys for well over a decade. I've been partnered with you for a decade, and to have someone like you who is a director of the sports stuff, I really thank you for your time and giving us some insightful stuff.
Oh, happy to be here. And like you said, I could talk for hours. So yeah, we'll have to do another one.
Yeah.
Anytime I can get and share my knowledge and education that's, I've been able to glean, if I can pass that on and make something make sense for somebody, or, inform their health decision, and really allow them to optimize who they're being, whether it's health and wellness, whether it's performance, that's a place I'd love to be. So happy to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to kind of share some knowledge.
Yeah, thank you. Joel Tortoro, you can find him on LinkedIn. Do you have any other ways people can, maybe if they have some questions about some stuff you said, that they can contact you?
Yeah, I'm unfortunately not a big social media guy, so I don't share a lot there that's educational, but Thorne does. So follow, Thorne on all platforms. And really, to me, if you go to the Thorne website, Take Five Daily is our kind of educational spot on the website. So if you start searching in there, there's multiple articles on multiple topics. So you can generally find some information there. And I do write some of those. And we do have a Thorne podcast. So we have kind of everything from pretty deep dives into a specific topic to I host a performance one. So that's a little bit more talking about the stuff we're talking about, some real world kind of
Oh, cool. Awesome.
what I can learn from this athlete, or from this practitioner, and just kind of just some tidbits that can go a long way to improving your knowledge. So yeah, any kind of Thorne's pretty great about putting education out. So that's where you can find a lot more of me. And then, there's always the, contact information on Thorne specific, that eventually gets triaged down to, if it's a sports question, it'll get to us. Or like I said, I'm one of 30 plus credentialed folks. So I may not be the best person to answer, and we'll know who the best person to kind of triage that to is, get you the information you need to make those decisions for yourself.
Fantastic. Well, I'll include everything in the show notes in terms of like the Take Five and the podcast. I want to listen to that too, because I'm surprised that I haven't. I feel irresponsible that I haven't done that, but I do know your product line very well. So again, thank you so much for coming on, Joel. I really appreciate it. I look forward to another one in the future if you can make time for it. And for everyone that's listening, thank you for tuning into the Stephen McCain Podcast, and we will see you on the next one. Stay healthy, everyone.